Welcome back to College Football Addiction. We're going to talk a little bit about one of the more fun rivalry games on a big weekend of college football this weekend. Florida and Tennessee. Allie Peak, a peek inside Gators football. Allie, how you doing tonight?
Just preparing for this storm, but
Yeah.
good.
Certainly a lot of people in the path of this. So if you're watching this, football doesn't really matter a lot compared to a lot of things. But hopefully this gives you a good reprieve for 15 minutes of not thinking about the storm that is coming bearing down on Allie and I's house right now. So our different houses
I
for
was just about to say,
different houses, but
path.
fairly close. So all right, last week Florida beats UCF, a game that honestly, like, the score got a little bit close at the end, but never really was in doubt. Never really felt like UCF had a chance to win. How much better do you feel coming out of that win just after the way that the last couple of years have gone? Florida gets over 500. Napier probably saves his job for at least another, few weeks. But were there enough things there to build on where you feel really good? Or is it like, well, quality of opponent? Like, where are you after that win?
Well, I said on my channel yesterday, I don't think you get flowers for beating a team that you should beat, but it's infinitely better than the alternative, right? Which is you lose to a team that you should beat. So, it appears that Florida made some corrections during the bye week. I do think you have to take into account quality of opponent, but they did some things that they didn't even do against Samford. So, that makes me happy. Florida got 5 sacks. They didn't get 5 sacks against Samford. Florida moved the ball decently well on offense in the first half. Their defense, though, honestly, was the story of that game. I feel like they looked like they had some fire. They had some passion. I watched these guys celebrate with each other. I watched these guys chest bump coaches. These are things that I've been looking for on the sidelines all year, and we haven't seen it until this week. So, do I think that means suddenly Florida's going to be bowl eligible? No. But I do feel like it looks like a first step. So can they build on that? I don't know, but I am hopeful with what I saw.
Certainly a trial by fire, taking on a top 10 team on the road in a rivalry game that Napier not been great in rivalry games, not been great on the road, but their last SEC game was on the road, and they won in somewhat convincing fashion at Mississippi State. Again, you're thinking quality of opponent there, but won their last. I mean, honestly, even before that, going back to the end of last year or middle of last year, beat a South Carolina team on the road. Does winning the last two give you a little bit more confidence heading into play a top 10 opponent in Tennessee?
I mean, winning begets winning, I think. I think that, does it change the eventual outcome? Maybe not. But you've got to think this team is a lot more confident heading into Knoxville than they would have been had they not beaten UCF or Mississippi State.
We talked about this the other day, just offline. Tennessee coming off of a loss that nobody really expected on the road at Arkansas. Winning on the road is tough, and it'll be tough for the Gators to win on the road this weekend, as it would for anybody going into Neyland maybe. But Tennessee coming off of a loss, does that maybe worry you a little bit more than if they had beaten Arkansas by 24?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's, there's a possibility that Tennessee overlooked Arkansas. There would have been the possibility that Tennessee overlooked Florida. That certainly is no longer a possibility, though. I think Tennessee thought they had a decent chance at running the table this season. And if not running the table, coming pretty darn close. And I feel like they probably had that third Saturday in October circled, right? And maybe forgot a little bit about Arkansas. Could have potentially have forgotten about Florida had that not happened. So this is a team that's potentially going to use that moment in a galvanizing fashion and just like, well, we're certainly not going to overlook any opponents from here on out. So it could make the game more difficult than it would have been had they won that Arkansas game.
Nico was off a little bit last week, and even with him playing off, he's probably still the second best quarterback. Unless I'm missing something that you will have faced up to this point. Cam being first, and then I think Nico would easily be your second best that you've seen.
And I don't know. The Texas A&M backup quarterback looked like a Heisman.
Yeah, he looked pretty great. It was kind of crazy that Texas A&M went back to the starter and blew out, Missouri. So yeah, must be nice to have two good quarterbacks, something that Florida also has at this point. But thoughts on being able to slow him and that offense down? Defense looked better this week, but just thoughts overall on, if UF's defense can kind of be up to that task.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that Florida's run defense is what has been pretty terrible all year long, although it was really good against UCF, who was the second best rushing team in the country. Tennessee is the fourth best rushing team in the country. So, can they replicate a little bit of what they did last Saturday? And, UCF, like I said at the beginning, is not, you don't get flowers for beating a team that you should beat, but their running game was something special. It was something statistically Florida should have done poorly against, and they didn't. They stepped up to the challenge. So that gives me hope that potentially they can follow the same blueprint for Tennessee. But, I'm interested to see what Heupel does with Nico. I think his tendency is to run. I understand, from talking to Tennessee insiders that they don't believe that that's what Heupel wants him to do, more because he's concerned about depth at the position than anything else. But, if they take the reins off of him, that would be a problem for UF, I would think. They've had a hard time defending that. So does Heupel make that move, or does he stay conservative? I don't know, but I think that's a factor in this game.
We talked a little bit about how Coach Prime put the blueprint out and basically said this is the blueprint on how to beat UCF, like take away the run. And UF, we asked, could UF follow that? And I think they did a good job of taking away the run. Jason Marshall, you brought him up to me. Maybe he's not Travis Hunter, but he did a great job taking away their best wide receiver and making UCF very, very one-dimensional. What I think the unique challenge that Tennessee provides is they if you stack the box against Tennessee, you're kind of picking your poison. You're hoping that Nico has another off night because their wide receivers, their offense is better than UCF's. I mean, KJ is really struggling right now. And so to me, that's kind of the unique challenge that they present. I don't know that, I think Florida is going to have to ask a little bit more of their defensive line because I don't think they'll be able to just put 7 or 8 in the box and just say, pass on us if you want. Because I think Tennessee will say, great, like bring it on. We would love to do that. So to me, that's the unique challenge that they present. What about Florida's offense? Like the 2 quarterback thing has worked, and I do think Tennessee has a better defense than UCF, a better defense than Mississippi State. I don't know if they're quite as good as Miami's. Miami's been a weird team these last couple of weeks too. But what about Florida's offense? Where do they need to get to? What is your confidence level in them being able to play on the road in the SEC against a pretty quality D?
Florida's quarterbacks have been really, really good. I don't know if you looked at the stats that I sent you today. I'm going to see if I can pull them up. But essentially, there are only a handful of quarterbacks, 17 quarterbacks in FBS with at least 600 yards passing, a 69% completion rate or higher, and 160 or higher QB rating. And Graham Mertz and DJ Lagway both fall in that 17. And it's 17 total out of all FBS quarterbacks. So that in itself, kind of speaks volumes. And I think that Florida has really had some wide receiver weapons step up in the last few weeks. Trey Wilson has been hurt. He had his knee scope, so they kind of were looking for other options. We saw Aiden Mizell a couple weeks ago really just shine against Mississippi State. He did not play last weekend, but we saw Badger and DK really kind of come into their own. Florida should get Wilson back this week too. So you got 3 really strong wide receiver targets, and then you got an entire stable of running backs. We didn't see Webb this past weekend, but we saw Baugh. We saw Jacoby Jackson, and obviously we saw Montrell Johnson. All of them found success. DJ Lagway and Mertz were able to even run a little bit against UCF. So I do feel like this offense is kind of clicking. The interesting thing about our offense against UCF, though, that I think is worth noting is that in previous games, if you looked at all the reps on Florida's offensive linemen, there was a ton of guys getting somewhere between 30 and 40-ish reps apiece, right? They're trying out all of these different guys on offensive line. But if you look at the snaps from last Saturday, there's 5 guys that got a lot more reps than everybody else. And so I think that means that they've kind of decided who their offensive line is. Now, we can have a whole other discussion about why it took this far into the season to decide who the guys are that you liked at offensive line. But it's an interesting note, and I do feel like Florida's offensive line played better last week. So, like, do they finally have their guys in place? And does that mean Florida's offense has the ability to be more successful, or at least for one half of football? I don't know.
Fans got pretty upset with Napier, and I have the opposite take here, so I do want to hear what you think about it. Fans got upset with Napier, like pulling his foot off the gas, whatever you want to call that, letting up in the second half. I actually didn't have as big of a problem, like with Florida, that's been kind of banged up at running back at times, at wide receiver at times. Like, I think he knew that, hey, this might get uglier than prettier, but I ain't here for style points. Like, I need everybody healthy next week. I didn't have as big of a problem with it, and UCF got it close-ish. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me why Mazan didn't go for 2 there. But even with that, like, say they cut it to 8, maybe that makes you a little more nervous. I still don't think they were going to come back. And so I didn't have as big of a problem with that. Now, certainly if that would have come back to bite him and UCF had made the big comeback, but just the way they were playing offensively, like I thought they were in pretty good shape, or the way they were playing defensively, I thought they were in pretty good shape. I didn't have a big problem with it. I understand why fans are upset. You want to beat the little brother by 1 billion. But what's your take there?
So, okay, couple things. I understand the logic that you're saying. I just don't know that I believe that that was Napier's logic, if that makes sense. I think that he just tends to be conservative by nature. And I think what we saw on Saturday night, there was never a moment in that game where it ever felt like in the stadium that Florida was not in control.
Yeah.
So, the critiques we have this week are literally just some kind of nitpicky things, because there was never a moment where it felt like, oh shoot, they might not win this ball game at all. But I think it's a microcosm of one of Florida's biggest complaints about Coach Napier, Florida fans' biggest complaints. And that's just that they don't feel like he has that killer instinct. They want to see foot to the throat, right? Pedal to the metal all the way through the game. It would have made Florida fans happy to win that by 50 points, right? And it's not even about UCF being the opponent or anything else. It's just that they want to see that killer instinct that I think we're not sure exists within Coach Napier. So, could it have been strategery to keep everybody healthy for next week? I mean, maybe, but I just don't know that I find Napier to be quite that deep of a thinker.
So I want to ask you your thoughts on what happens, but first I do want to get this kind of read or check, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more as the season goes on. If I look at Florida's schedule the rest of the way, I think there are games that are certainly more winnable than maybe we thought earlier. The Florida State game certainly looks very winnable. Kentucky would be the one that I guess is maybe next winnable. Then I'd maybe put LSU and then Ole Miss, then probably Tennessee, Georgia, Texas, kind of that order. Will fans be, if Florida does find a way, say they beat Kentucky, beat Florida State, and then one of Ole Miss or LSU, Florida finds a way to get to 6-6. I think you, at that point, probably keep Napier. Will fans be happy with that? Will they be frustrated with that because they already felt like they were jumping off the wagon? Or how will the fan base react to 6-6 and going on?
I think 6-6, coming from what we felt like probably a week or two ago, might feel like a win for Gator fans. That doesn't mean that they're satisfied with the 6-6 season, but it would feel like a massive turnaround, I think, if they ended up 6-6. There was a time a couple weeks ago where we thought we might be 1-11, right? So, I think it would feel like it was the season was kind of salvaged a little bit. I still think fans would be frustrated that Coach Napier was our coach, but I do think the benchmark is 6. So I really do feel like from the powers that be, the people that make the decision, if he were to find a way to get to 6 wins, he would be our coach the following year. I kind of wish if he was going to get to 6-6, it happened in a better way, because then he'd have some more fan support. I feel like if he only lost the games that he was supposed to lose, then maybe we'd have a different feeling. Now, if A&M and Miami make the playoffs and Florida beats Tennessee and they beat Florida State at the end of the year, and let's say they pick off LSU, maybe Florida fans do feel differently, right? If our losses come to teams that end up in the playoffs, it becomes much more easy to kind of talk yourself into, okay, we lost to teams that are in the playoffs. I think the hard part still is it's a Texas A&M coach who is in year 1. It's we are losing to programs that don't have the talent profile and that have had a head coach for less time than Florida has. And so those things are still kind of nagging issues maybe, but he still probably gets your 4.
Yeah. I mean, there's a good chance that Florida will have at least three playoff teams. Like I think Miami's probably going one way or the other. I think Texas is going. I think Georgia will still find a way in. And then, I mean, you could have one of any of LSU, Ole Miss, Tennessee. And I don't think they all go, but you could have 4. I think 4 would be my number, and maybe an outside shot at 5. Like Ole Miss and Tennessee don't play each other, so they certainly both could go. And so, yeah, Florida might end up playing 4 or 5 playoff teams. If you lose to 5 playoff teams, it's hard to get super upset with that if you basically beat everyone else minus A&M. So, yeah, it's an interesting situation. But, yeah, there will be fans, I agree, that are frustrated by it still. And there will be fans that will say, yeah, like we turned it around. We played better than we thought. Look at who we lost to.
The biggest thing when you make your decision to fire a coach or not to fire a coach has to do with whether or not you've lost the locker room. And I don't think that it's a fair statement to say that Coach Napier has lost this locker room yet. I think all you have to do is watch that sidelines against UCF and know that this team wants to save his job. You look at the number of players that have already opted out of the season. None of them play for Florida, And so I just, that still exists. So, at this point, let's see where it can go.
Yeah. You've also talked about this, just the way that it looks, right? If they were to lose by 30 in Knoxville and lose by 30 in Jacksonville and lose by 30 in Austin, those are going to be really hard to overcome. If they go 6-6 and some of those games are closer than you think they should be, you lose by 10 on the road in Austin, or you somehow keep it within 2 scores in Jacksonville.
You have to feel like you're in it. And that's part of why fans are so upset about Miami and Texas A&M. And again, they may end up being playoff teams. But there was not a moment in either of those games where it really felt like Florida had a shot at all. Yeah. And that's the feeling that I think is so frustrating to fans. If we had gone down to the wire and lost both of those, I don't know that fans would feel like they do today. It's the fact that we never even had a shot that is what makes fans so miserable.
Yeah. So on this game specifically, Tennessee, a pretty big favorite, 15.5 points. ESPN gives them a 86.9 or 87% chance to win the game. What are your thoughts on this? I know we're early in the week. You'll do an official prediction on I think Wednesday night, assuming we have power and internet and everything else. But thoughts on how this thing will end up going down?
I'm the eternal optimist. I want to think that Florida has a shot in this game. I do think they lose. I think that they probably would have lost anyway, but Florida losing to Tennessee losing to Arkansas last week doesn't bode well for the Gators. Those fans are going to be pissed. Those players are going to be looking for vengeance. I think it's going to be rocking on Saturday night, and that's going to be a really intimidating venue for this Florida team. Billy Napier coach teams don't particularly play well on the road. And I do think that Tennessee is incredibly talented. So, all things equal, Tennessee beat Arkansas. This game is in the swamp. All of those things. I still think there would have been a great chance for Tennessee, but none of those things are the case, right? It's on the road at Neyland. It's a Tennessee team that's out for blood because they're really upset about what happened last week. It's a night game. None of those things bode well for the Gators.
Yeah, Neyland feels like a fun place to be this weekend, a place that will just be absolutely rocking.
Oh, it's one of the best places in the country to watch a college football game. If you've not made it up to Neyland, you have to. It is an experience.
They play Alabama in a couple of weeks. I don't know. There's no chance I'm going, but I kind of like entertain the idea of it. So, Allie, where can people follow you? Where can they find more of your content?
On YouTube, A Peek Inside Gator Football, or on Twitter, Allie_Peek, which is PEEK. Yeah.
Awesome. I appreciate you for hanging out. Good luck this weekend.
Thanks. Go Gators.